Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us at the noon hour today for this presentation and Q&A session on the future of Golden Gardens Park. We're excited to have you all here. Looks like we have 25 or so people joining us. And we'll give folks another minute or so to hop on, and then we'll get started. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you to the 30 people I can see joining us on Zoom today. My name is Allie Langley. I'm a public involvement specialist with Cameron McCarthy Landscape Architecture and Planning. And you all are welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat today. We're going to be doing a webinar style presentation, and we encourage folks to add in the chat your comments and your questions in the Q&A feature. We won't be calling on folks to talk. We'll be doing a presentation for the first part of this session, and then we'll have a Q&A session for the second half. So that's our agenda for today. And we've got city and other project staff joining us here. So I'll go ahead and hand us off to Carolyn Burke with the City of Eugene's Parks Planning.
Hi, everyone. Just making sure I'm unmuted there. Thank you all for coming. And we have a presentation. We have a lot of information that we would like to share before getting to your questions and answers. So I'm going to jump in here and just introduce folks to the site first. So Golden Gardens is a 223-acre park site with access off of Clear Lake Road and good connectivity to local highways. And through this planning process, we have been, next slide, Allie. Through this planning process, we have been talking about accommodating three primary elements within this park: a sports complex, a natural area, and a neighborhood park. And all along, if you've been involved, you know that we've been talking about finding the right balance between development of the park with the existing natural resources and the natural area, and also finding the right balance between the immediate neighborhood considerations as well as broader community needs related to recreation and economic development. Next. I'm going to spend just another minute talking about the sports complex because I know that some folks just needed more information. So why a sports complex? Well, we do know that Eugene has been short of sports fields for decades. And the problem with that is that we know that participating in sports is one way for our community to lead healthy, active lifestyles. And particularly for kids, research has shown that when kids play sports, they increase their chances of growing up healthy. They feel good about themselves. They can build friendships. They can build skills such as respect and team building. They're also more likely to succeed in school and in future careers. So those are opportunities that we all want for our kids. And we want those opportunities for our kids that live in Bethel. And so having this facility in Bethel creates better access for those youth. So we wanted to understand a little bit more about the shortage of playing fields in Eugene. And so in 2016, we commissioned a market analysis to further look at that need. And this analysis did indeed show that we do have a shortage of playing fields in Eugene when you look at our population and our demographics, and that as we are a growing community, we will continue to exacerbate that problem if we don't address it. And the study also showed that there are economic benefits that can be gained if these fields are constructed within a sports complex that can host regional tournaments. And so by holding these tournaments, there is income generated that will help the city to operate the facility. But there are also broader economic benefits to the community itself, because we have folks from outside our community coming here, spending their dollars on things like restaurants and hotels, which helps not only the Eugene community, but those are services that are needed in the Bethel area. And so by creating more of a market demand for those types of services within Bethel, it will both help existing businesses, but also make new service industry more economically viable in Bethel. And also then, why Golden Gardens for this amenity? Frankly, Golden Gardens is the only property that the city of Eugene owns that can accommodate this facility. This is a really large site, 223 acres. It is the second largest developed park site that we have in Eugene, second only to Alton Baker. It is flat. It has good access from local highways. It's inside the urban growth boundary, which means that it is planned for urbanized development at some point in time. Currently, about 150 acres of the park site are sitting as fallow parkland, and we just know that's not the future for that site. We do encourage folks to go out on site, visit there, and we have put up banners to show the distance between the proposed sports fields and the ponds on both the east and the west side of the ponds. I think the ones on the west side are a little hard to see because of some grade changes, but we have them out there and hopefully you can see them. But that can give you a sense of just how large this site is, because it's really difficult to tell just on your screen and from looking at pictures. Next slide. So a little bit about the history of Golden Gardens. The ponds, there's a 3-pond complex at the center of the park. And those were actually dug as gravel pits in the 1950s. And that gravel then helped to build local highways. The ponds sat dormant for decades, really. And at some point they passed in ownership from Lane County to the city of Eugene. And in the 2000s, there were a series of really tragic drownings that occurred at the ponds. And in reaction to that, the community really galvanized around insisting that changes be made on site. And so there was a community engagement process then, and there were 2 outcomes to that. The first one was to identify what changes need to happen immediately. And the second one was to establish a long-term vision. So for those immediate improvements, we have already implemented all these. We have made the ponds safer by laying back the banks. That has also helped improve the habitat values of the ponds. And we've seen a lot of improvements actually since we've done that. It also improved emergency vehicle access to the site and constructed the trail system that you see out there today. For the long range vision, and that's actually the diagram that you're looking at right now, is the long range vision for Golden Gardens. Of note, at that time, an 8-field sports complex was identified for use on the east side of the ponds. And so really that tells you that we've been talking about a potential sports complex here for almost 20 years. The other thing I want to point out is on the west side of the ponds is additional acreage that the city purchased in 2007. So that was an additional 170 acres that was added to the park site. Next slide. So this is a timeline, many of the things I've already mentioned here, but I want to jump to 2018 when a bond measure was passed by Eugene voters to fund improvements to Eugene's parks and recreation facilities. And phase 1 of a sports complex was a project on that bond measure list. And that is really why we are here today. We actually have a budget of close to $5 million to do this planning work and begin implementation of phase 1. So we have been doing this community engagement to develop a concept plan for the site. And the concept plan basically is aimed at identifying what are the uses, the future uses on the site, and exactly where on the site would they happen. But there is a lot more that has to happen once we get through that phase. So the next slide shows kind of our project moving forward, starting with the concept plan. Some of the future work includes a triple bottom line analysis to guide our decision-making around the sports field surfacing. There are good arguments for using synthetic turf. There are good arguments for using natural turf. And we are committed to doing an analysis that looks at that choice through the triple bottom line lens of environmental conditions, economic factors, and social equity considerations. We have hired a third-party consultant, Parametrics, that does this work all over the region to do this analysis for us. And actually, last night we presented and had a good conversation with the Sustainability Commission, who provided input into the types of criteria and considerations that we should be thinking about when we do that analysis. So that was a great meeting to kind of kick off this effort. And we will be taking our draft analysis back to the Sustainability Commission for their review and input once that's complete. There's also a lot of permitting in our future here. We know we have local land use permits. There will be a transportation impact analysis required. There will be environmental permitting at the local, state, and federal level. We fully anticipate that the western pond turtle will be listed as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act within the next year. And with that will come a whole new layer of regulation under the Endangered Species Act to ensure that we are doing what we need to do to protect that turtle population. And we are fully committed to complying with that process, because that is the city's goal as well, is to protect that population that we have been working to make successful for years now. So, but with that permitting process, it could mean that changes are made to the concept plan. So my point there is that, you know, the concept plan kind of represents our best information to date. But as we go through that process, it is possible that new information and new requirements will change that concept plan. And so once we get through that process, we'll begin looking at phase 1 design and construction documents and potential construction beginning in 2027. And we do anticipate this being a phased construction project due to the large scale of the project. Next slide. It should be a phasing plan. So we are not certain about what will be in phase one because we're a ways away from that yet, and we don't know what our budget will do. But as far as priority improvements, we know that we need to get people into the site off of Clear Lake Road. So we would be building the vehicle access road into the park. We'll probably also need to be doing some intersection improvements with that new road at Clear Lake Road. We would like to be able to build as many rectangle sports fields as our budget will allow. We don't know how many that is, but we would be required to construct parking to support those fields. And we also fully anticipate that the habitat mitigation and improvements would be required ahead of anything else. It's likely that that will be a requirement of any permitting, that we establish that mitigation before doing other improvements on the site. So that is what I have, and I think I'll turn it back to Allie to talk about community engagement. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn, and appreciate seeing chat comments, and there's also that Q&A feature. Folks can add questions that we'll answer at the end of this presentation. So yeah, I wanted to talk more about public involvement that we've done through this process in 2023 and now here in 2024. We did a series of interviews, about 10 of those, with folks representing diverse interests and user groups across the community. We did 3 advisory group meetings, again, looking for broad perspectives in that advisory group. We did 3 surveys, including the one that is live right now, 3 focus groups. We tabled with interactive activities, which is some of what you're seeing here in these photos, at 5 neighborhood events in the Bethel neighborhood in spring and summer of last year. And then we also hosted 3 public meetings, both in person at schools in the Bethel neighborhood and with hybrid or remote options like we're doing today. Last year, as we were going through understanding what folks needed and wanted out of this park, a few things were rising to the top, as well as some concerns for the park planning process. So I'll just reiterate those. These are the top things that we heard. We heard that folks really wanted sports facilities sufficient for tournaments, a habitat area that with conservation and enhancement of that habitat area, neighborhood park amenities, and that's things like playgrounds, picnic shelters, more paths and trails, bathrooms, and equitable access across demographics and transportation modes. In terms of concerns coming up, we've heard folks concerned about loss of the existing park experience, wildlife and environmental impacts, neighbor impacts, so that's to folks who live in the adjacent residences, so that could be noise, lights, and traffic. And then potential undesirable use, such as litter, off-leash dogs, and overnight use, and then maintenance costs. The last time we were engaging with the community last year on this concept planning process, we were presenting everyone with the 3 draft concepts that we built from the previous round of engagement. And those were azul, verde, and amarillo, as you can see here. And we got a lot of really great feedback on these concept plans, really nuanced feedback that's all available on the project website through the events and tabling and the survey, focus groups, all those things. And at a really high level, we heard that amarillo, which I'll talk about more in a second, was the most preferred of those draft concepts. And while the survey, this is a survey response here, while that provided pretty clear direction on the overall design, the in-person events were also an opportunity to listen to community emotions and excitement about this future park. And we were hearing from those events in Bethel that residents, parents, youth, members of the Latino community were generally pretty supportive of adding park amenities to Golden Gardens. So here's amarillo from last year. And what made this draft concept unique was it had rectangle fields on the west side of the park. It had fewer diamond fields and parking spaces than the other two concept plans drafts. And it had the largest natural area. So from there, we spent the last year honing in on understanding all those nuanced comments and developing the working concept plan that Mark Cosmos with the City of Eugene will tell you about now.
Thank you, Allie. So before we turn on some labels and orient everybody, I think this really tells a story, this image. This is a bird's eye view from the south looking north. And you can see where 3 sets of sports facilities are on the site. And the takeaway, what I really noticed before the labels were put on this was that we're really maximizing our natural area. Even more so than we did with the Amarillo concept. So let's go ahead and get oriented. The existing ponds are about 40 acres, and then all of the natural area that we're planning for with this concept design, including those 40, is going to be now 168 acres. That's about 4 times bigger than what the current trail and natural area experience is today. And then the fields themselves, along with their parking and the roads and the court complexes, those are about 44 acres. So the balance here is really towards the natural area. But I said we'd get oriented, so let me do that. On top right-hand side of the screen, you see Highway 99. So just as the feasibility study said, to do a sports complex, you need to have access to high traffic roads, and that's what we have. Clear Lake Road is where we will get our access into the park. You see the star at the very top. That's the entrance off of Clear Lake Road, and that's our one way in and one way out to the park. Now, on the south end of our park, we have Jessen Drive. And so the south part of the park, this is where the quiet neighborhood is. Fortunately, there's a stream channel that goes across the bottom of our park on the screen. It runs from east to west. And, right now, if you were to visit the park and walk around the trails, you'd be parking somewhere along Jessen Drive. And by building the sports complex and providing parking within that complex on the perimeter of the site, we're actually giving other access points for everything that's going to be there, including the natural area. And that's going to take some of that pressure off of the neighborhood on Jessen. So we have, I'll just mention the 3 zones that we have, excuse me. We'll kind of go clockwise. And we have a sports soccer field complex on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. And that's 22 acres approximately. So, when we list these, it's the supporting facilities as well. It's the bathrooms, it's the playground that's inside, it's the maintenance building and the parking and the roads that go all the way up to Clear Lake. Then up on the very top, we have a multi-court sports court sports complex. So court sports are things like basketball and volleyball and pickleball. And then on the far right-hand side, we have our softball baseball complex, and that's 8 fields and about 19 acres. And then, of course, at the very bottom, we have a neighborhood park, and that's to serve people within a walking distance, which would be that immediate neighborhood to the south. So now let's look at a couple of views, starting with, I believe, the natural area. And for orientation on where you are, if you were to download these off of our website, there's a key in the top right-hand corner of all of these images, and there's an arrow that shows where you're approximately standing or hovering in the air and looking. So we're looking southeast. You can see Spencer's Butte in the background. And I want to point out the edge of the natural area, specifically the West Pond edge. So that West Pond edge is just part of that habitat, but it also happens to be where a lot of the turtles are nesting and successful. And so we're doing a couple extra things. We're taking a multi-prong approach to how we're going to treat the area around that, that nesting habitat. First is to expand the turtle habitat fencing. It's we call it a predator-free fence. You may have seen it if you walked out there. It's designed so that four-legged creatures can't climb up and over and then dig out the nests. And there's a very small section of that carved out right now. They do nest outside of that area, and those nests are more susceptible to predation. So we're talking about expanding that predator-free turtle habitat. Another type of fence that we're looking at is to keep our two-legged creatures out. That's you and me. And that fence would be a barrier to the entire west edge of the pond. So we're talking about removing people and dogs from that edge. And the reason being is that during the nesting season, which is the most important time, not just, I mean, it's important year round, but during the nesting season, if turtles see movement, they react. And if that happens during nesting season, they can't abandon their nests, and that's not great. So for those approximately 3 months out of the year, you know, it's really important that we try to keep them from seeing us walking by. And that trail right now runs right by their nesting area. So one of the first things we would do would be to improve the habitat protection on this side of the ponds with our first phase of construction. So that area to the west is, we're calling it a restricted access preserve. And that's about 26 acres. So there's a distance there. So the further you are away, the less you have to put yourself in the perspective of a turtle and lay down on the ground and look up and think, you know, can I see somebody walking by? So distance is one way to do that. Putting in berms and vegetation is another. And of course, combining all three of those is a great way to do it. So in addition to moving our trail outside that access preserve, making it longer, it's actually going to be a nice running loop, 1.1 miles or 1,800 meters, thereabouts. We're taking that multi-prong approach of giving them the space that they need, giving the turtles. Now let's look, if we were to pan to the right, we're actually going to pick a different viewpoint of the soccer field complex. In the background, you can see where that preserve is that we just looked at. Thank you, Allie. The soccer complex takes its entry off of Clear Lake Road from the north. And before you get to it, you're actually going to come to a bicycle pump track. Now, the idea of a pump track came out in that early 2006 study and public engagement. And so that's something we've been looking for a home for here. And we found it between the soccer complex and the edge of the property. And what a pump track is it's a paved loop, a paved circuit for bicyclists and all types of bikes. And instead of pedaling, you actually use your momentum and movement on steep banked corners and rolling hills to keep yourself moving around and around in the circuit. So it's a small feature, but it's popular. So the soccer complex itself has 6 lighted rectangular fields, and their size accommodates soccer, which is the largest possible striped footprint if it's set up for that. But it will also accommodate the other sports like football, lacrosse, and ultimate frisbee. It has a support facility in the middle, and there are a few things in there. We have a plaza with a concessions building. We have a restroom building. These are plumbed restrooms, year-round use. We have shade structures, physical structures that'll give us shade on day one. Planting, of course, will take a little while to grow in, and a playground in there, because when you come with a family and you're at an event, not everybody in the age group is actually out on the field. So there's a great gathering spot and something for the kids to do where they don't have to look elsewhere for that. This facility has its own paved parking, about 280 spaces, and an overflow parking on a grass field. I did mention that with all of these and the parking, we will have an access to the natural area trail. So on the very bottom of the screen, you can see the soft surface walking running path does make a connection to the bigger loop. And there's also a connection point on the northeast corner of the soccer fields. It's just obscured a little bit by the trees. So you can see we're also doing trees as part of the buffer along the fields as well. Did I miss anything? Yes, the bicycle and pedestrian bridge is going to go over the A2 channel and connect to the existing Jessen bike path. So for alternative transportation, we can get folks to the soccer complex. Next slide, I believe, is softball and baseball. Now this is on this side of the ponds. We are actually closer to the edge of the pond, but believe it or not, we're equidistant as far as the field distance from that nesting area on the other bank. It's the space that we have. So here we're doing a lot more berming and buffering with plantings on the backside of those fields. And I just wanted to point that out before we get into the heart of the complex here. So this diamond complex or baseball softball complex has 8 lit fields. Those fields have an adjustable 200 to 300 foot fence on the back. So that means that the size of the field can be changed so that if you have different age groups or different experience levels, the field can be moved and basically resized to accommodate all that use, which is really great. Once we have that investment, we want to get the most out of it. One of the fields would be a championship field, just as in the soccer, I did forget to mention that, which means it has bleachers to support crowds that want to come and watch the event. For or all of these fields can be striped with youth soccer. So when the soccer fields are in full use, these are big enough for a youth field, but they're not big enough for a full-size soccer field. So doing double duty on there and striping them in the outfield is what we're planning to do. This facility has its own restrooms. It has its own concessions area and shaded gathering, its own parking as well. And next slide, please. The last of our facilities are the sport courts. These are also lit. We have on the very top 8 lit sand volleyball courts. We have 4 lit basketball courts, full-size courts, and we have multi-court sports. And so that could be either 16 pickleball or 4 tennis or some combination of those 2 numbers. Each one of these areas would have its own shade structures for gathering, sitting, waiting your turn to play. And then this area also has its own parking. The parking is a little bit more dispersed around this because it does get us to all the different court zones. It's both on the road that goes to the softball complex as well as the one that goes to the soccer complex. It's the first thing that you'll see when you come in off of Clear Lake Road and arrive at the site. And we think that, that high intensity use, and I'm thinking pickleball, of course, is very popular. There'll always be activity at the park. And when parks are active, that's also when they're safe. I'll just say a couple things in general about lighting. So lighting technology has come a long way. I don't think we have an example in Eugene. Somebody did bring one up in the public meeting, but it's still probably 2 or 3 years old now. Lighting has cutoff features, and that means it's designed in such a way that if you want it to just shine forward, it does. And so lights are designed so that they minimize light pollution. That's light pollution for the neighbors. That's night sky pollution as well. So they're really directed at the courts. And with that, I think we just have a neighborhood park to take a look at. And our neighborhood park has a nature-themed playground, a shaded picnic area, half-court basketball, paved walking loop. Little ones love to learn how to ride their bicycle in our neighborhood parks. It's a great, safe place for them to do that. We do provide an irrigated lawn for just a multitude of uses that neighbors would like to have, but it's not striped. It's not part of the complex. It's also physically separated from the rest. We do intend to, as part of the adjacent bike path system, find a location near the existing kiosk for a porta potty. Because if nothing else for the bike path, that's important, but that could also serve the neighborhood park. And I believe just off the screen we would have a fitness station for adults, and also off screen is a natural area walking trail like we have in many of our other parks. So really only about half of this park is getting developed. And of course, when this happens, we will also make improvements to our portion of Jessen Drive that abuts the neighborhood park. With that, I think we're going to go and have some time for clarifying questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Allie for this.
Thanks,
Oh,
Mark.
I didn't mention the stream bank restoration. We did that successfully many years ago, right up against the ponds, and we're planning on doing that also between the neighborhood park and the softball complex. So that's another natural area improvement that we're doing. Sorry, back to you, Allie.
Thanks, Mark. No, it's important to note that. All right, and I just want to again thank everyone for joining us. We're going to get into our Q&A here, and I see we've got 50 participants on with us right now. So again, thanks so much for adding your questions in the Q&A feature and comments in the chat. I'm going to turn us over to Julie to reflect some of those questions, and we'll have staff answer those now.
Yeah, I want to turn first to the questions that really help us understand the design better. And Mark, simple 2 questions is the distance between the ponds and the softball, baseball complex, and how we're going to mitigate noise and light. So, yeah.
Unmute. Yes, so on the softball baseball complex, there's a plan view that you can download online, which actually has all those dimensions on it, just in case anybody wants to look this up afterwards. It's a 320 feet from the edge of the baseball complex. And if you can move your cursor to that lower left complex there, we put banners on that bottom left diamond field on that curve so that you can walk out there and see what that looks like. And in fact, just to the left of it, there's an existing berm. Allie, if you could point to that.
Okay.
Right there. And so that berm would get bigger, and then we'd be doing plantings probably up against the field, but also we could be doing that along those trails in order to buffer both the visual view of the fields from the pond, from your turtle perspective, as well as buffering noise. And then on the left-hand side, we have that 1,000-foot buffer to the edge of the pond, as well as the preserve area, which is human free, human and dog free. And you can see actually, so on the right-hand side, the 320 plus 730, so that's just over 1,000 feet. The reason we're showing that is because that habitat on the left edge of the bank, that's where they're nesting, right? The turtles are nesting right now, and it's further away than than the actual pond itself.
Cool. And then another lighting related, will the lights be off at night when there are no games?
Yes, they will. So the lights would be programmed or controlled by our parks and or recreation department. So unlike, I think what the question maybe is alluding to is there are some tennis courts in town where you press a button and the lights come on. That not for this complex, no.
Cool. And then will people still be able to ride their bikes on the running and walking path? And I think that's assuming, like, address both. There's the bike path and then there's walking paths through the park.
We've always talked about them as walking and running paths and not as a bike path. We have seen bicyclists out there, but I think we've probably been a little silent about that. If somebody can maybe help me out here from our group, do we have a park rule currently about bicycling around? And that's something else that we would look at too, because in addition to kind of distance buffers and other things. We're going to talk about what those uses are. We do have a maintenance path that runs through there. That's just for staff. It's bollarded, gated, so the public can't use that. But we're talking about those kinds of things. What's the potential impact of, say, a bicycle going around that path, fast or close or something? We really have to work that out. I would lean towards the no side, but we just haven't discussed it.
I agree with you, Mark. I think currently it is okay to ride bikes out there. There's not a rule against it, but I would kind of look to our permitting through with regards to the turtle listing to see if there are going to be restrictions on that type on bicycles in the area.
Cool. Another transportation related question, will there be a park entrance from North Terry? And that was a question we also had in the in-person session last week.
There may be an entrance to the park off of Terry Street, but only if it connects to Clear Lake Road. And the reason that's important is because Terry Street is a neighborhood street, and it's not the high volume that Clear Lake is. And our intent is not to create and design a route that sends people somewhere where it just doesn't make sense for large groups and large crowds to go. That is something that would be undertaken by the transportation planning department, and right now they don't know where that road will go. It may snake to the left, it may go straight up, but at some point it should be connecting to Clear Lake Road. If it doesn't, then no, we won't have a park entrance there.
Cool. A few other just pretty big picture questions before I turn to a few more detailed questions on the natural area that I see. What is the total cost of the project? And I just want to recognize there are different phases, there are different estimates, just a general thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll take that. We actually don't have a overall cost estimate yet. We're kind of waiting to make sure that we have this concept plan dialed in. We do anticipate that it will be significant, approaching, between the $80 million or so or higher. That's kind of speculation, so I don't want to get too detailed into that. And that is why we are looking at a phased approach to this project. And as you'll recall, I mentioned that through our last bond measure, we have almost about $5 million for phase one. So kind of a very small percentage of what will be needed for full construction. We would anticipate multiple funding sources going towards the future development, including future bond measures. This project does qualify for use of system development charge funds, which is another good funding source for us. And then we're also looking to private partnerships, and there could be some sponsorship and things like that that helps to pay for the facility.
Awesome. So some more specific, there's a couple questions. Will revegetation be done with native plants? What's going to happen in that natural area?
I'll take that if you like. So we haven't picked we don't have a species list. We know we're gonna revegetate the area, and we're doing native plantings now in and around the pond. I don't imagine that's going to change. If it's a natural area, you don't go towards commercial plants or plant beds. Now, the parking lots and the stormwater facilities that we're going to need for treating, runoff from the parking lot, runoff from the fields, that sort of thing, those go to more traditional commercial plants, not natives. There can be natives in there, but the purpose there is really for screening to the neighbors, for taking care of and filtering out pollutants, the oil that drips from your car onto a road or onto a parking stall. And so that's the plan for the parking area.
Cool. Questions about turf, recognizing that Barbara leaches, she leaches microplastics, leads to injuries. So how would we be mitigating those impacts? Why would we consider natural grass? And then how is that working with the Sustainability Commission? And will the public be able to interface with the Sustainability Commission?
Sure. So beginning, I guess, with the leaching concerns, we would absolutely be required to treat any storm water runoff from the fields. We will be, as I mentioned before, there are really good reasons to do both natural grass and synthetic. And because it's just not a simple decision, we are really engaging in this really thorough analysis that looks at all the considerations, including the one that Barbara brings up. And so we'll be basically comparing the different field surfacing choices and looking at just how they measure up and better understanding what the trade-offs are. As I mentioned, we had our first meeting with the Sustainability Commission last night. There were a number of people that provided input at the beginning of the meeting and also submitted comments. And that is something that is still available. Comments can be submitted to the commission via their website. Though all that information is then getting passed on to the project team who is doing the analysis. And you can also, those meetings are recorded, so you can, I don't know if it was just last night. I don't know if it's on the website yet, but you can certainly go and watch the recording of that. And did I answer that question? I think I did.
Yeah, super helpful.
Yeah, and we do have another meeting. It's not scheduled yet, where we will be again meeting with the Sustainability Commission specifically to review our draft analysis, and they'll be providing input.
Cool. Quick question, difficult question about noise. Like, what about a public address system? How is that going to interface with the neighborhood?
So we haven't talked specifically. That's a detail that comes out of design development. I would imagine we are going to have a public address system because it is a complex, and if you need to address people, you do. Thank you for asking the question. Again, this did come up in our public meeting, and the way I answered this to one of the folks who sent me an email is that the public address system is something that's required for a park like this, but it is actually part of our land use code as one of the it's listed in our land use code as one of the things that's allowed with a facility like this. And there are actually it made my head hurt to read through the noise requirements. It talks about decibel levels and all sorts of things, but essentially our code is designed to protect public interests for things like that. So we're not opening the floodgates and saying we can make any kind of noise we want. There are things like that do make noise, but it's just part of this ambient. It's not going to be any louder than traffic going down Clear Lake Road and that sort of thing. So,
and I'm going to ask a few really quick questions. EV charging stations, are there any planned for the park?
I'm sure that those will be considered, but we have not gotten to that level of detail yet.
Okay, cool. And then let's see. I think I wanted to also address a little bit kind of next steps in some of the questions. So John was asking, so what about the questions that were asked in earlier sessions? Where can we see answers to those, what they were? Allie, do you want to talk a little bit about how we're going to process all this information?
Sure, thanks, Julie. So we'll be summarizing the questions that were asked at last week's meeting and this week's meeting in a public involvement report that'll detail the all of what we heard through this process. And again, you can go on the project website now and see the summaries from previous engagement methods, and that's where that'll be found in the future.
Cool. And then I'll just keep going. The overnight parking, camping, will that be allowed in the park?
I'll take that. In our previous options for concept plans, there was an option for overnight RV parking, and we heard strongly from the community that that was not something that was favored, and so that has been removed from this plan. There is an allowance within Eugene code that occasionally, and this happens like I think at Amazon Pool, maybe once or twice a year, where there can be an overnight for a specific event. We haven't discussed whether or not that would happen here, but it could, but there would not be a formal camping year-round kind of situation at this site.
Cool. Lots of thoughts about native plants and just talking about how the city does the details of landscape planning and how this big picture concept plan then connects to that kind of detail.
I'm wondering, Lori, do you want to comment a little bit about how we make decisions about planting in our restoration areas?
Sure. Yes, I'm Lori. I'm one of the ecologists with the Parks Planning work group and have worked out at Golden Gardens for many years, as well as many of our other natural areas. And in the natural areas, we always plant native plants. And those of us that are doing the planning have ecological and or botany background. And so we are choosing native species appropriate to the habitat that we're restoring. And so we've done a lot of native planting out here, and we would do more. And so I anticipate that anything within that 160 acres would be a natural or a native species. And then, beyond that, we are also carefully selecting plants that we know will thrive in the long run. So for example, Oregon ash is a native species that thrives. However, with the threat of emerald ash borer, we would not be planting that species. So there's lots of nuances there. Now, when we're talking about parking lots and developed areas, there are often native plants used, but not always. And I'll let Mark or someone else speak to that.
Yeah, that probably just starts to tie in the maintenance component, how we intend to maintain the site. So, natural areas, you might think, it's kind of hands off, but it's not. There's a lot of work that goes into maintaining those. There's a lot of work that goes into maintaining the landscape beds and parking lots. And the maintenance regime is different in each of those cases, and different work groups take care of them differently. In native areas, you don't use pesticides. Actually, we don't use them in a lot of our parking lot areas as well. So, every site is different. It's special. And we take the interest of, the neighbors, surrounding neighbors and neighborhood, as well as what that ecology or that area needs to be.
Thanks.
I don't think I answered that very well, but
yeah, it's good. I wanted to touch base on a question about how has this project interfaced with advisory groups or organizations, and just thought that would be helpful as a background information.
And I'll take that one, Julie. Thanks for that question. So I mentioned that we formed a project advisory group to give feedback and advise on this project. And the intent was to have diverse interest groups and perspectives represented. And so we ended up having about 10 people on that advisory group, and they were representing Bethel School District, the Bethel Neighborhood Association, environmental advocates, 3 organizations that represent environmental conservation and environmental justice, sports groups for youth and adults, and economic development And then we also had the mother of one of the children who died at the ponds about 20 years ago was also in that advisory group. We also did 3 focus groups, one with ecology and natural resource advocates, one with sports groups, and one with mobility device users.
Awesome. I'm going to keep going, and thank you so much, staff, for your concise answers, because we're getting to a lot of these questions. So will dogs be able to get to the pond, and are they restricted from the pond in any way?
They will be restricted within the restricted area, but along the east side of the ponds, there will not be a fence. There will not be a barrier between the trail and the ponds. So whereas it's not something that we will likely be encouraging at this point, there isn't a barrier. And please, somebody on the project team, if I'm wrong on that, let me know.
Can I add also that dogs should always be on leash in city parks, except in off-leash dog parks. And so that's unfortunately something that people misunderstand sometimes in our larger natural areas. And I will also add that we don't know with the northwestern pond turtle listing, you know, dogs swimming in a waterway with a listed species could be considered too disruptive. And so we don't know. We'll wait to see what U.S. Fish and Wildlife comes up with in terms of restrictions and guidelines for how we're making sure we're taking care of our turtles.
Thank you. And a quick clarification on the paved paths. The person was actually asking about the paved paths. Are there paved paths going through the park in any way that bikes would actually be able to be on? And I think that's a really important question also for mobility device users.
Yeah, if I could get some help from our cursor director. All of the paths shown in white, so like around the soccer complex, there's paving all the way around, as well as the paving in the near the restroom, and that path does continue along the edge of the parking, and then up past the pump track, and that paved loop goes in and around all the different multi-courts, as well as all the way down to the baseball area. So there's a lot of looped paved paving. The paving around the existing ponds is a bark mulch path, and that's what we will be doing in the natural area as well. When we move that existing path to the west, it'll be that same type of path.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to wrap this toward conclusion because I want to honor folks' time, and just want to acknowledge the full range of comments and ideas, concerns, folks that are excited about this. Really appreciate people showing up today. Let's talk a little bit about next steps in the process and where we go from here. And I just want to acknowledge, I did not ask a lot of the details around the turf because that is an ongoing process, as we talked about with the Sustainability Commission. And I just encourage you all to follow along with that. So next steps.
Thanks, Julie. So I can take that. We have a survey that's live now, encouraging folks to take that survey. It's on the project website, and we'll put those links in the chat. The website will have, it already has FAQs, frequently asked questions about this project, and we'll be continuing to update those based on the input that we've gotten today and last week. And then the recording from this meeting will be shared on the project website as well. And then if you have any questions or comments, you are welcome to get in touch with Mark Cosmos, who is the project manager on this project.
Thank you, Allie. And I'll just say there are several unanswered questions, folks that have emailed me directly or shared their concerns, and I just haven't gotten back to everybody yet. So I will if you're on the call, or if you're not on the call. So thank you. Please remember to take the survey. Please remember to check the website. We do publish information there all the time. And if you're interested, you can sign up on the interested parties list, and that way you'll get an email when major updates are put up there.
And I'll just make a plug that we do have a Q&A that we will be adding to after this. And so again, if your question wasn't answered, check out our Q&A and we'll try to get to it there.
Thanks,
Sorry.
everyone.
Thank you.
Time today. We really appreciate the, looks like we've had 50 or so folks joining us. So thank you so much. Take care and have a great rest of your Thursday. Alyssa's still on. I think you can stop recording.